Mighty No. 9's record-shattering Kickstarter and then mismanaged development made its share of headlines, but a closer look revealed a much worse story. The real problem with Mighty No. 9 was the chasm of separation between what people wanted and what Conceptor-in-Chief Keiji Inafune wanted. People just wanted Inafune to make a game. Inafune instead wanted to make a media empire, a Mighty No. 9 cartoon, Mighty No. 9 live-action movie, Mighty No. 9 comics. This premature ambition mixed with a muddied corporate structure were the real downfall of Mighty No. 9. And, incredibly, this isn't even the only time it's happened. Welcome again to Past Mortem, and to truly understand why Mighty No. 9 was no accident, we must focus on the man at the center of it all, Keiji Inafune. In this video, we want to not only dive deeper into this gaming legend, we also want to examine a few common claims about Inafune. Let's start with the claim that he is the, quote, father of Mega Man. Keiji Inafune started his career at Capcom in 1987, working as an artist on Street Fighter. That's the first Street Fighter, by the way, before moving on to Mega Man. However, Inafune joined the project midway through after most major characters, including Mega Man and most Robot Masters, had already been designed by director Akira Kinemura and others. Though initially only hired as an artist, Inafune always had ambition for a bigger role in the company. When an artist starts out, they'll actually tell you that eventually you'll hit this wall that you can't ever get over. For me, that kind of stuck in my head. True to his ambition, he adopted the pseudonym Inafune. Mega Man 1 didn't end up setting the world on fire. That would be left to Mega Man 2, which became a massive hit. However, Mega Man 3 would mark the turning point in his career. By then, Kinemura had departed Capcom to make the Japanese exclusive Kokorone, and Mega Man 3 development was not going smoothly. Midway through development, Inafune rose to project lead after the lead planner and other prominent members of the team abruptly left. It was from here that he would become the face and the shepherd of the Mega Man series, having production roles on nearly every entry since. Still, that doesn't exactly make him the, quote, father of the series. The title likely came about because Capcom didn't want to credit one of their star franchises to people no longer with the company. He more or less inherited the title. While in recent years his fatherhood has been interpreted more literally, Inafune has tried to set the record straight on who is the actual creator of Mega Man. Credit typically goes to Akira Kinemura, but let's be real. Games are ultimately a collaborative process. But that didn't stop the title being attributed to him for years in the press. Seriously, try to find an article that doesn't cite him as the father or creator of Mega Man. And ultimately, it didn't stop Inafune from using it to his advantage, which I can't really blame him for. Hey, it's good business. So no, he is not really the father of Mega Man, but he does deserve credit for having hands on basically every single Mega Man game. And speaking of business, this brings us to our second point of clarification. On the topic of things brought up to discredit Inafune's legacy, people often point to a tweet from Resident Evil 2 and Devil May Cry director Hideki Kamiya, where he said, Inafune is not a creator, he's a businessman. This one is a bit more complicated to talk about. First off, we believe this comment from Kamiya is often taken out of context. We think it likely has to do with the fact that Inafune has barely ever directed a game before. Throughout his career, he's mainly appeared in artist or producer roles. People seem to forget that Kamiya clarified this in a follow-up tweet, stating that he respected Inafune's role as a producer. Perhaps as a director himself, he would prefer to give credit to a game's director. If you'll notice, Kamiya has been extremely critical of Mighty No. 9, but not of Inafune, at least not directly. But who knows what Kamiya really thinks? Instead, let's really think about this. Is this candid tweet from Inafune's former Capcom colleague really a smoking gun? Inafune has had a 30-year career in the industry with many crests and falls. It's worth taking a closer look. As Mega Man fast became one of video games' most prolific, if hit-or-miss characters, Inafune became a key figure in other Capcom franchises as well, including Onimusha, Resident Evil, and Dead Rising. Jumping from one success to another, Inafune rose through the ranks. Frankly, his rap sheet was pretty rock solid, but his reputation and his ability as a businessman would be truly put to the test in 2005 when he was promoted to Senior Corporate Officer of R&D. From here, he would spearhead an ambitious change to Capcom's focus, a more global focus, all while simultaneously preserving a unified Capcom voice. It would mark the beginning of a pattern that would follow Inafune for a decade. A bit of background. Though Japan was the dominant force of gaming in the 80s and 90s, things dramatically shifted in the following decade. Most global blockbuster hits started coming from the West, and Japanese games began lagging behind in terms of sales. For instance, in 2002, Japan bought half of all video games sold by itself. But that was the high point. As gaming took off on a global scale, Japan's market share shrunk before taking a serious hit from the global recession. That is, until mobile gaming swooped in around 2009, which now represents a significant majority of Japanese gaming sales. By this time, Japan as a country bought only 10% of all games sold. For example, the initial run of Street Fighter IV sold about 200,000 copies in Japan versus 2.3 million overseas. While this equals Japan's expected proportion of global video gaming sales, it shows why developing games solely for Japan was becoming unsustainable, especially since the US and China are the world's largest gaming markets. Because Japanese developers were making less and less money off of their Japan-targeted games, they were quickly losing the capital required to invest in the development of console games with global appeal. This is something Inafune had known for quite a while, saying in 2010 that in order to compete with Western developers, Japanese companies needed to spend at least $66 million developing and promoting a game, a price point which requires about 2.4 million units sold to break even, at least according to typical estimates. That's a tall order for struggling companies in a struggling market. Back to the early 2000s. While this problem had yet to manifest, Inafune could see the shifting tides and started on a seemingly obvious solution to this burgeoning problem. Just make games targeted towards Western gamers. The first example of his Western push is the little-remembered PS2 game Shadow of Rome. Released in 2005, right before Inafune's big promotion, Inafune would later cite this Onimusha clone as an example of a Capcom problem of only shallowly developing a game for the West, with games suffering from being a peroxide blonde copy of their Japanese counterparts. Though the game got alright reviews, it dramatically underperformed sales-wise.
Are you satisfied?
Despite this, Inafune's business sensibilities only became more emboldened, convinced that games with a Western focus could be successful, but they had to be taken more seriously. Enter 2006's Dead Rising, which started as a sequel to Shadow of Rome. The game was effective for a ton of reasons, but it certainly didn't hurt that it successfully tapped into the decade's zombie pop culture resurgence. Also, Lost Planet, released later in the same year, was another big seller and critical success. It certainly didn't hurt their global appeal that they were Xbox 360 exclusives, a system far more popular in the West, and were developed in-house by Capcom. The Western push had shown potential, but would quickly take a turn when Capcom moved ahead with Inafune's plan to farm out Dead Rising and Lost Planet sequels and two other titles, Bionic Commando and Dark Void, to Western developers. On paper, the strategy should have been a slam dunk, but it failed in actual implementation. While Dead Rising 2 was a critical and commercial success, other titles, like Lost Planet 2, were fraught with development issues. But the two games that truly represent the downfall of Inafune's big Western push are the 2009 Bionic Commando Reboot and 2010's Dark Void. Dark Void was co-developed by Washington State-based Airtight Games and Capcom. Though forecast to sell 2 million copies, the actual sales were far more dismal, at least under 600,000 units, as it didn't even make it onto Capcom's report of titles sold. But the larger nail in the coffin was Bionic Commando. Capcom hoped sales for this 2009 title would reach the millions, but it sold dismally at just 700,000 units. Apparently, the tail end of development suffered a near-complete communication breakdown, with Inafune summing up relations between Capcom and Swedish developer Grin as whatever, do what you want, I don't care. This game would help result in the bankruptcy of Grin. These games and their outsourcing process were traumatizing for Capcom, with lead execs like General Manager of R&D Jun Takeuchi saying that cultural differences don't allow for the smooth collaboration between Japan and developers overseas, and President Haruhiro Sugimoto saying that they would reevaluate working with Western developers and would only develop new titles primarily in Japan. In case you forgot, the whole point of outsourcing to Western developers in the first place was to help create new IPs to appeal to Western audiences. Not coincidentally, it was around this time, 2009, that Inafune began venting his frustrations to the press. He became an outspoken critic of Japan's video game development scene, declaring Japan is over, an item that Western media reported with glee.
Personally, when I looked around all the different games, I said, man, Japan is over. We're done. Our game industry is finished.
And he wasn't done. He would continue his doom and gloom pronouncements, calling Japan 5 years behind the rest of the world, and eventually admitting that even Capcom can barely keep up in the global market. But when you understand the context of these quotes, it becomes harder and harder to think of him as a quote-unquote businessman, or at least a good one. A poor craftsman blames their tools, right? Despite this, the failure of these initiatives didn't seem to splash on Inafune in the Western press or even at Capcom. In April 2010, Inafune was promoted to Capcom's global head of production, essentially making him the head of Capcom's research and development and in charge of over 900 employees. A few months later, in September 2010, Inafune revealed his most innovative development project yet, the Mega Man Legends 3 project. This eagerly awaited sequel to the cult series utilized a rabid section of the already rabid Mega Man fanbase in an attempt to crowdsource development and involve fans. If Western devs weren't going to work out, then why not sidestep them entirely and go straight to the source, to Western gamers? It was an interesting way to utilize a Western audience, basically a Kickstarter before Kickstarter. It was to be short-lived, however, as just 1 month after the announcement of the Mega Man Legends 3 project, Inafune dropped a bomb on the gaming world. He was leaving Capcom to start his own company. Okay, well, companies. Big question. Why did Inafune leave Capcom after getting promoted to such a high position just a scant 6 months earlier? In his departure interview with 4Gamer, Inafune blames a mistreatment of the Inafune brand, saying essentially that Capcom didn't care if a game had his stamp on it or if it was just from Johnny Anon, producer man. Feeling underappreciated, he blamed the salaryman system, what he called a communist state that incentivized creators to not attempt anything new because the risk of failure would rid them of their lifetime guaranteed jobs. Capcom's unwieldy development structure was too wasteful, with a team of nearly 1,000 working on only 3 to 4 games at a time. A strategy, he felt, unsustainable in the floundering Japanese console gaming market. Budgets were bloating, but financial success was far from assured. As we illustrated earlier, the push into Western markets makes a ton of fiscal sense, but it's easy to see why Capcom abandoned the strategy when you see that each version of perennial moneymaker Monster Hunter sells millions in Japan alone, even though it has yet to find similar success overseas. So when Capcom backed away from its Western-focused push, Inafune deflected blame and declared that Capcom hasn't taken globalization seriously. Inafune further goes on to reveal that when he quit, none of his top brass peers came up to him and asked him to reconsider, or even talk to him about it. If this lack of respect is indeed due to the culture of the salaryman system, where unwanted employees can be mistreated to force them to leave of their own free will, perhaps this is just a reflection of the downward slope of Inafune's global initiatives. Perhaps Capcom was not unhappy to lose Inafune. After his departure, Capcom made good on their promise to work with Western developers on established IP, and thus Devil May Cry, Strider, Lost Planet, and Dead Rising all saw revivals and sequels respectively. Inafune wanted to prove to himself that he could succeed on the promise of the Inafune brand outside of Capcom. So confident of his brand, he already considered himself the hero Japan needed to reignite its industry. By December 2010, 2 companies were born, Concept and Intercept. In order to allow space to innovate, he wanted Concept to be a lean company that focuses on creating ideas for entire media projects, not just video games. That includes making the occasional one-off manga, but it is code for multimedia franchising, making media empires. Intercept, on the other hand, was focused solely on game development as a traditional game development studio. Inafune also started a 3rd company a year later called Ding that would focus on mobile and social gaming. When asked if managing 3 companies would be too difficult or would spread him too thin, Inafune says that at Capcom he managed over 900 people spanning over different divisions. So in his view, managing 3 companies with 30 people total would be an easy task. The difference, Inafune explained, between his companies and traditional Japanese development is that they were not going to focus it necessarily on what exactly the people want, and would instead prioritize their own creative integrity. However, when asked how they were going to be able to succeed here when other companies could not, Inafune replied, "The big difference is those companies didn't have Keiji Inafune working for them." He got off to a running start. Within the first year, Inafune announced a deal with Japanese media empire Marvelous Inc. for his first intended console game post-Capcom, Kayo, King of Pirates for the 3DS. Kayo was intended to be based on the Romance of the Three Kingdoms saga. In an interview with Silicon Era, Inafune felt that he could get the Western audiences unfamiliar with the sprawling Eastern epic because he recreated it with a pirate theme and all the characters are animals. It's easier for people to get into since it's totally recreated. Okay, first off, we have to admit that a ton of our favorite properties are just totally recreated stories, and that's how it's been since, I don't know, history. But come on, Inafune, haven't you already tried something like this before?
Are you satisfied?
It would be a while before we would get an update on that project. Luckily, Inafune had other irons in the fire. His deal with Marvelous also had him and Concept working on 2013's Soul Sacrifice for the Vita, selling at about 730,000 copies, including Delta. It's a glowing mark on Inafune's post-Capcom record. Tangentially, it's hard not to hear Inafune talk about the mechanics of Soul Sacrifice without feeling the echoes of his departure from Capcom. In Soul Sacrifice, it's possible to play by sacrificing your hero for the good of others. With this success, perhaps Inafune felt like he was well on his way to establishing himself as an international force while resuscitating Japan's so-called lagging development scene. While little is reported about Inafune's third company, the mobile developer Ding, which now appears to no longer be active, it developed one of Inafune's most successful games of his indie career, Boiling Osan, a freemium game which has been downloaded about 1.8 million times. It was released in 2013 and was supported until 2015. It even had a sequel. It's important to note that despite Boiling Osan's success, it is essentially just a relatively well-executed joke, less of a traditional game and more of a gag. It wasn't even translated for a Western release, but god damn do I love that song. Dango, da ba ba bango. Concept released other games during this period, various mobile games, and the unsuccessful Yaiba Ninja Gaiden Z.
I've always known exactly where to stick my sword, sugar tits.
Of course, their biggest project was the now infamous Mighty No. 9. Marketed as essentially the return of Mega Man, it promised to represent Inafune's successful blending of his old Capcom lineage with the new age of Japanese gaming. A Japanese game made for the West. The saga of Mighty No. 9 was intense enough for us to already cover it with another video, so we'll skip most of the details here. But here are the cliff notes. Mighty No. 9's development was fraught with communication and management issues, including asking for additional funding at least 3 times, eking a partnership with a publisher that left high-tier supporters in the cold after, launching the Red Ash Kickstarter project before delivering on Mighty No. 9, inking another deal with another publisher when that Kickstarter flopped, multiple delays of Mighty No. 9 finally resulting in a troubled launch that, as of now, still has not delivered all promised versions of the game. It's important to underscore again that Inafune worked towards making Mighty No. 9 a multimedia enterprise, and he had announced a cartoon and other ventures to go with the game, and that these ultimately fell through. While Inafune pictures himself as an enlightened innovator within the Japanese scene, the events of this Kickstarter suggest that he did not understand that crowdfunding would open himself up to accountability to his supporters in a different way than it would with a publisher. While it's admirable that Inafune was willing to secure funding for his projects by any means necessary, he seems to fundamentally misunderstand why this would be upsetting to supporters until it was too late. While everything with Mighty No. 9 and Red Ash was going on, we finally started to get updates on the mysterious Kayo, King of Pirates. Marvelous Inc. went all in on Kayo, and again, like Mighty No. 9, manga and anime were announced to be in the works even as release dates were pushed further and further back. Hell, they even had merch ready. Everything seemed great until it wasn't. Right before Mighty No. 9 started crashing, Kayo got formally canceled in 2015, with Marvelous announcing that they had lost about $3.8 million on the development of the game. For those keeping score, that's about how much Mighty No. 9 raised, and this marks Inafune's third attempt at a media empire. This title was the only game we found listed as developed by Intercept, and it appears to have taken down the studio with it. Intercept's website hasn't been active since January 2016, and while it is still listed on Concept's website, clicking on it will lead you nowhere. After Mighty No. 9 came out in June 2016, Inafune laid low. Given his controversial profile at the time, it's not surprising. But it was noticeable that he was largely not involved in the promotion of Concept's collaboration with former Metroid Prime developer Armature Studios and Microsoft. Inafune is credited with the concept of Recore, which was ultimately criticized as too janky, possibly unfinished, and feeling too much like a PS2 game remastered for the PS4. Though it was featured as a crown jewel in Microsoft's 2015 E3 presentation, by January 2017, the game ended up only selling around 220,000 units. As of right now, it's unclear what is next for Inafune and Concept, besides Red Ash and its accompanying anime now known as Red Ash Gear World, which are both slated to come out sometime in 2017. It's unfortunate and ultimately a bit tragic that Inafune's attempts to break out on his own has been met largely with disappointment, failure, and controversy. But perhaps after all this, it's his inflated ego and dogged pursuit of glory that is misguided. It's undeniable that Inafune's storied career is nothing to sneeze at, but at the end of the day, Inafune didn't realize how cushioned he was by Capcom's bloated corporate structure until he left his former home. While he sees himself as an innovator, and it's undeniable that he is an innovator by the standards of the Japanese gaming industry, he ironically is not able to shake off his roots, and he keeps making the same mistakes that he denounced over and over again. The ultimate irony lies in one of Concept's and post-Capcom Inafune's most successful titles, Boiling Osan, a free-to-play app about cracking open the shells of old businessmen, revealing a hard-boiled interior, literally an egg stuck in its ways. For Derek Alexander and Grace Kramer, this is Past Mortem, signing off. Thanks for watching! Do you have any crazy video game stories you want investigated? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and also check out our Patreon for some SSFF extras you won't get anywhere else. If you haven't watched it yet, go ahead and check out our full breakdown on the Mighty No. 9 Kickstarter campaign. Also, to celebrate the new Bomberman game coming out for the Switch, we checked out the last game of the series, Bomberman Act Zero, to see if it was really all that bad. We're on Twitter, Instagram, Twitch, and now your computer screen. Toodles, and see you again real soon.